From the first night, Elias Crow cut his cabin into the limestone throat of Widowmaker Ridge, the town of Frostfall decided what kind of man he was without ever asking his name, because people in the high country believe rock remembers sin and caves are mouths that whisper it back, and a man who sleeps inside stone is either hiding from God or daring him to look closer. Elias felt that judgment every time he rode past the last fence post and the lanterns went sparse, felt it in the way the wind sharpened and the sky widened like a blade. Yet he kept building, hands split and bleeding, carving timber to fit a cave that breathed cold even in summer, because the land had already taken his wife and unborn child in a spring flood 3 years prior, and he had learned that believing in open things, rivers, promises, towns, was a gamble he could no longer afford, so he trusted what was solid and unmoving and old as regret itself. And when the cabin finally stood, smoke finding its way out, through a narrow flue and firelight painting the stone amber, Elias slept better than he had since grief taught him how heavy a man's chest could feel. Frostfall laughed, softly at first and then louder, said he was a fool building a coffin for himself. Said the cave would collapse, said wolves would drag him out by his boots, said winter would seal him in like a curse. And Elias said nothing, because grief teaches silence better than sermons, and silence suited a man who had buried a future tree with his own hands. He lived there through lean seasons, riding down to town once a week with pelts or cordwood, nodding to faces that turned away, taking payment that was always light, and returning to the cave with the sense that he was already half a ghost to them, a story used to scare children into staying near the fire. And maybe that was fine, because ghosts feel less when they are passed through. But he was not unfeeling, not where it mattered, not where memory pressed, and on certain nights when the wind clawed at the ridge and the snow creaked like old bones, Elias would sit by the stove and speak to the air as if it were his wife's listening ear, telling her how the mountain changed color at dusk, how the cave sang when the storm leaned close, how he was still here even if the world preferred him gone. Frostfall's winter of record arrived without ceremony, a 5-day blizzard that marched in low and wide, swallowing the pass and burying fences and turning the sky into a white wall that erased distance and direction. And the town, with its proud storefronts and clapboard church, found itself small and brittle beneath the weight of it, roofs groaning, chimneys choking, the river freezing in jagged plates that moaned all night like cattle trapped beneath ice. On the first day they joked and shared whiskey, and told themselves winter was a story they had survived before. On the second day, the jokes thinned. On the third day, the wind began to peel shingles like scabs, and a child went missing between the schoolhouse and home. On the fourth day, the food ran low and the firewood lower, and the mountain road vanished so completely that even prayer felt like shouting into a pillow. And somewhere above them, Elias Crow woke to the sound of the cave settling into itself, stone popping as the temperature dropped, the stove drawing steady, the cabin holding, and he knew without pride or fear that this was what he had built for. Not comfort but endurance, not welcome but survival. He saddled his horse inside the cave mouth where the wind could not reach, checked the lashings on his sled, and felt the familiar ache of choosing to act when the world had already decided you did not belong. Because grief does not kill a man outright, but it does make him choose harder. And Elias chose Frostfall despite Frostfall never choosing him. He rode down blind through snow that erased the trail, trusting the memory in his hands and the way his horse leaned into the drift, trusting the mountain more than the map. And when he reached town, the bell at the church was half buried and silent. Doors drifted shut, windows frosted opaque, and the faces that finally gathered when he shouted his name were hollowed by hunger and fear. Eyes flicking from his beard rhymed with ice to the cave behind him in their minds, the place they had mocked, the place they had dismissed as madness. And in that moment, Elias felt the old anger rise, hot and useless, and let it pass. Because anger wastes heat, and heat was a currency no one could afford. He brought them what he could carry, salt meat, grain, a spare stovepipe, knowledge of how to bank a fire so it lived through the night. And when a mother fell to her knees and wept into his coat, he stood stiff as a post, because comfort had been taken from him, and he did not know how to give it back without breaking. And yet he did what needed doing, splitting wood until his shoulders screamed, showing them how to brace roofs, how to listen for the sound that meant a beam was about to go, how to follow the river's voice under ice. And the town's disbelief began to thaw into something else, something like shame or gratitude or the uneasy recognition that salvation sometimes wears the face you refuse to learn. On the fifth night, the storm deepened instead of lifting, the wind finding new ways to enter lungs and walls, and a rumor cut through the gathered fear like a blade. The missing child had been seen near Widowmaker Ridge, drawn by light or lost by drift, and the town turned as one toward Elias, toward the cave they had named as a joke and now named as hope. And Elias felt destiny's weight settle where his wife's hand used to rest, heavy and intimate, because he knew the mountain would not give life. Without taking, new caves remember promises, and as he pulled on his gloves and turned back into the white with a lantern swinging low, he understood that belief comes late and costs dearly, and that before the blizzard broke, the mountain would ask him to pay. The wind shrieked like a chorus of the lost as Elias Crow pressed deeper into the blinding white, the lantern swinging like a pendulum of hope, each step a negotiation with the mountain that had both sheltered and cursed him, and he could hear the child's cries somewhere ahead, muffled by drift and ice, a thin thread of sound that tugged at a part of him he had thought dead when his own family had been stolen by fate's indifferent hand. Frostfall's people followed as best they could, huddled. Behind his horse, faces streaked with snow and tears, trusting a man they had mocked for years, and Elias knew that their lives now rested not on law or prayer, but on his stubborn understanding of wind, stone, and the quiet whispers of the cave, the kind of knowledge passed down only through silence and suffering, because the mountain never forgives ignorance. Hours stretched like eternity, every ridge a new trial, snowdrifts swallowing boots and sleds, and the child's voice grew weaker, fear mingling with the cold until it became almost unrecognizable. Yet Elias held on, calling out, guiding, steadying, his own breath a white cloud mingling with the storm's howl, and for the first time he felt the full weight of his solitude, the cabin back in the cave, a fragile memory of warmth and promise, a symbol of endurance that had prepared him for this moment when the world demanded everything he had left to give. When they reached the narrow cliff ledge where the child had been trapped, dangling over a frozen ravine, Elias's heart stopped in a way grief had never taught him, a stillness that made every frozen pine a witness, and without hesitation he dismounted, rope coiled over shoulder, gloves stiff with frost, each motion a prayer to the stone and sky, and with hands that burned and bled, he anchored himself and lowered down, whispering the child's name as if calling her through a dream, until he felt a slight weight, a small body trembling, clutching his sleeve, and the mountain seemed to sigh, or perhaps it was Elias, finally exhaling all the years of guilt, loneliness, and fury he had carried like iron chains. The climb back up was a gunny in miniature, every inch a negotiation with ice and gravity, every breath a victory over death, and when the child was finally lifted into the arms of the townfolk, faces pale and frozen but alive with astonishment and gratitude, the realization hit that the cabin in the cave had not only survived the storm, it had survived the town's scorn to deliver salvation, that the very place they had ridiculed was now the landmark of their deliverance, and in their eyes Elias saw reflected a mixture of fear, shame, and awe, a mirror of the life he had built in stone and silence. That night, as they huddled in the makeshift shelters around the town square, firewood running low but spirits higher, Elias stood apart, chest aching with exhaustion, watching the flames paint faces with warmth, and for the first time he allowed himself a thought he had long buried, that sometimes survival is a quiet kind of heroism, unclaimed and uncelebrated, and that destiny is not a gift but a demand, one that asks everything and gives nothing in return except the bare chance to endure. When a young boy, still shivering, asked him how he had done it, Elias only shrugged, letting the silence answer more than words could, and in that silence the town began to understand, not just that a man could build a cabin inside a cave, but that a man could hold the storm at bay, that courage could be simple, steady, and solitary, and that hope often comes from the corners where nobody thought to look. By dawn the blizzard had eased, leaving behind a landscape etched in frost and silence, and the townspeople, eyes wide and hearts heavy with awe, began to speak of the cave in reverent tones, no longer as a place of ridicule, but as a symbol of endurance and unshakable will. And Elias, walking back toward the mouth of Widowmaker Ridge, felt the first real warmth of pride and sorrow mingled together, because he knew the mountain had taken much, demanded more, but in its cold embrace had given the town a chance to live, and him a chance to remember that even in a world carved by cruelty and chance, a man can choose to stand, choose to fight, and choose to save what matters, even if the world refuses to believe until it has no other choice. And as the camera of memory would have lingered on that ridge, lantern swinging, horse steaming in the frost, townsfolk behind him whispering thanks into the vast white Elias's gaze lifted toward the cave where fire still burned and smoke still curled. And he said softly, more to himself than to them, "This is only the beginning," a whisper that would carry beyond frost and stone. And as the story of the man in the cave spread, he turned one last time toward the mountain, a silent invitation for those who had ears to listen. And in that invitation lay the unspoken promise that courage, endurance, and hope are worth witnessing, worth remembering, and worth following. Just like the next tale waiting to be told on the Western Tales, where destiny rides with every story, and every story can change the way you see the West.